3 news stories about becoming a werewolf in public. First, I drove a werewolf in my cab. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I only discovered your channel in the last few weeks, and I've been going back through your years of episodes listening to old stories. One of them in particular really blew my mind. It was the one where you tell your own father's werewolf story. It was so much like my own that I had to write you this email right away, telling you my story, so that you can see what I mean. Now, I don't think that I could have possibly been meeting the same guy as the one your father drove, because this was a young man and my story took place about 40 years after your dad's. I was actually getting ready to retire when this happened. I was in my late 50s, but my hair was all gray, and Matilda, God rest her soul, was nudging me that we should move to Florida, which of course we later did. This was around 20 years ago now, I suppose, so just after the turn of the century, like 2002 or 3 or 4. We were still living in the Bronx, and I was still driving a cab in Manhattan. It was fairly late at night, when things can get extra crazy. I had just driven some college kids from a club up north to Columbia University, and I remember on 114th Street I picked up this long-haired young guy, thinking that he was also a Columbia student. When I asked him where he wanted to go, he just asked me to drive along Broadway. I told him I needed a destination, and he apologized but said that all he remembered was that it was down this way ahead, and that he'd know it when he saw it. I really didn't like the sound of that, because the direction he was pointing was uptown. And uptown from 114th Street gets scarier the further up you go. At least that's how I remember it back in those days. I tried to convince the kid to get out of my cab and let me drive back downtown to where the tourists are, but he dropped down 2 20s, said I could keep all of it, and insisted it wasn't that far. I pocketed the money, and I zipped my lip. So we started driving north, and I kept asking, "Is this the place?" and "Are we there yet?" Sort of slowing down near almost every corner, hoping to get this over with before we were too much further north. Next thing I knew, we were driving past the Cotton Club in Harlem, and this kid is like, just a little further. But somewhere in the 130s or so, that guy started gurgling, like he was strangling in the back seat. I turned around to see what the guy's problem was, and I saw he was freaking out all over the place, like he was jerking back and forth and left and right, like he was having some kind of an attack back there. I told him I was going to pull the car over, and all of a sudden, this hairy clawed hand reached through the hole cut in the plexiglass, and grabbed me around my throat. Then a real deep voice told me, "You keep driving, or I swear I will bite your face off of your skull." That voice was coming out of the mouth of a full-blown werewolf, like something out of a horror film. And he was still changing, too. He was sprouting hair and fangs, and it was a crazy thing to see. He was also clearly in a lot of pain, and I asked him if I should be bringing him to a hospital. So he looks at me with these eyes that are not human. He says, "Drive, meat." And this meat shut up and drove. So we're up in Morningside Heights and so forth, all the places I least wanted to be at 2 or 3 in the morning, you know? And I was on a tour of each of them. But then, all of a sudden, and completely without warning, the guy leaped out of the cab into traffic. I heard cars beeping, and someone slammed into me from behind. I couldn't see where the werewolf ran off to, and by then, I had to deal with the boring legal crap that happens when someone hits your cab. So that was the bad end of my awful night, doing incredibly tedious insurance whatnot and exchanging information and so forth. So it wasn't until I got home at almost dawn that I remembered that I had literally seen a guy become a werewolf in my back seat. I woke Matilda up and I told her my story. I remember she asked me to pinch her, so I did. Then she smacked me hard for pinching her. Turned out she thought she was still dreaming. What with her husband waking her up, saying that he had driven a werewolf through Harlem. But I kept insisting it was real, so she got up and made us some coffee while I went on Google Maps to see what was around that place where the werewolf ran out of my cab and caused the accident. I found the location. It was Broadway between 154th and 155th Streets. And Matilda pointed out what was actually there. Wouldn't you know it? There's a cemetery on the left. And guess what's on the right? Another cemetery. The one on the left has famous people, like the Astor that they named Astor Place after, and the Audubon that they named the Audubon Society after, plus lots of others who I'm sure were quite famous and important in their time. What business do you think that dog-headed werewolf kid had in that place? Or the other cemetery behind the Grand Church of the Intercession across the street? I mean, this wasn't just a Looney Tune who had a mental illness telling him that he was a werewolf. This was a guy who became a hairy, canine-faced freak in the back of my cab 20 years ago. He was a legit and real wolfman. So where did he run to? And what do you think he did once he got there? There's no wrong answers since I never saw the guy ever again. I have no idea what happened to me that night. And after hearing that similar story that your dad told in the Bronx, with his happening in the 50s or 60s, that there must be something about cemeteries that attracts werewolves and people who think of themselves as werewolves. Maybe you know what that is. I'm kind of scared to find out, to be honest. Well, that's my story. Hope you can use it on your show, and thanks. Story number 2. I became a werewolf. In court. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Not many people who know me now would believe that I used to be a lawyer. Granted, it wasn't for very long, barely over 1 year before I was disbarred. But I'm going to tell you a story about those days, because it's also the story about how I first became a werewolf. You heard me. I'm a werewolf. It's the reason I couldn't be a lawyer anymore. It led to over 10 years of hardship and homelessness for me, with some time spent behind bars for vagrancy and petty theft of food. Then a guy took a chance on hiring me as an assistant mechanic, teaching me cars inside and out. These days I'm co-owner of the garage, and my life is about as orderly as a werewolf's life can be. Of course, I can't be available to work night shifts. So I consider myself okay these days, and it's afforded me a comfort level where I can look back on my days of being homeless as a series of humorous anecdotes and lessons I got to learn that I would never have learned if I hadn't been exactly where I was, living on the streets, without a dime in my pocket. But this is a story about when I was still a bright young man on the rise, a hotshot new young lawyer, taking on cases to help out people who couldn't afford to hire a lawyer. I was a court-appointed lawyer, and I was barely making ends meet. But I knew that I was on the path to eventual comfort, so I threw myself into being a legal Robin Hood, helping the poor defend themselves against the rich. Of course, when you do things like that, you make enemies of some very powerful people, ones who are used to getting their way and know how to remove obstacles from their lives. I was making myself an obstacle, and werewolfism was the way that they removed me from their path permanently. It was the morning, and I was heading into court to defend a poor man being accused of theft by a rich man. The poor man was actually being framed because he had been dating the rich man's daughter. He was going to go to jail for something he didn't do because this rich girl had fallen in love with him. I was in over my head with this case, but I was the only defense this guy had. As I was walking from the subway to the court that morning, lost in thought about the upcoming events of the day, a man wearing sunglasses and a black suit came out of nowhere, holding a very large dog on a leash. The dog snarled and bit my hand before I could even react. The man pulled the dog back a little too late, and then smirked at me, asking me very calmly if I was alright. I was not. My hand was bleeding, but I was going to be late for court, so I said I was fine and I headed on. I was planning on cleaning the cut up when I could use a restroom, but by the time I was going through the metal detectors to get into the courthouse, I couldn't even see where I had been bleeding. There was no sign of any cut on my hand at all. In court that day, I have to admit that I was feeling strange, and occasionally a bit woozy and dizzy. I thought I might be dehydrated, so I secured a bottle of water and drank it all down like it was a shot glass. I was not only very thirsty, but I felt ravenously hungry as well. At one point my stomach made a noise so loud that the judge told me I was speaking out of turn. My client kept telling me that I didn't look well, and I knew I felt weird, but this was an important day in the trial. I didn't want to ask for a delay. I think also that I was feeling a surge of energy because I was becoming the werewolf, but I didn't understand that part on that day. Yes, that dog that bit me, he had to have been a werewolf. That was what I was becoming as well. It was quite uncomfortable, believe me. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. Everyone was talking so slowly. I wanted things to speed up. Most of the time you spend in court is wasted. There are so many ways things could be sped up. And on that day, I was extremely conscious of all of them. I felt such a deep loathing not only for the lawyer I was facing, but for the judge, and everyone else in that courtroom too. I was just feeling intolerant because of the terrible feelings involved in the transformation I was locked into without any conscious awareness. There came a point when I knew something different was taking place. There was a flourish toward the end, where most of the changes actually happened. The nose elongating into a snout, the ears popping up on top of my head, not on the sides. All that happened in less than a minute, and I suddenly was covered in thick soft hair, like a long-haired cat or something. It was incredibly itchy in the clothing I had on, and I started trying to get out of them, which caused one of the women in the room to scream. I don't remember which one. By that point, all the humans were starting to look the same to me, like meat, wrapped up in cloth packages. I remember screaming, a lot, but I don't remember chasing people or taking bites out of them, or any of the other things they later informed me that I did. I know my client did lose his case, which I guess was why I was made into a werewolf in the first place. So many nights since then, I've awakened from dreams about that trial, wishing I had been more prepared for something like this to happen. There are so many things I could have done differently if I had thought ahead a little. Instead, that innocent guy went to prison, and I lost my career and my life. I became an animal, in and out of jails for the next decade. No use to anybody, and certainly never again a Robin Hood for the poor. Not that I'm complaining. These days I have the best of both worlds. I've got half ownership in the garage, I've got a wife who loves me, and then, at night, I become the werewolf, and I go out prowling and howling, and I do whatever I want to, until the sun comes up the next morning. It started as a curse, but these days it feels more like a gift. Nothing's ever been the same since I became a werewolf in court. The janitor in our school is a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, we've got this janitor at my high school that I am certain is a werewolf. First of all, he told me that he is. Second of all, I saw a reflection of him where he was the werewolf. Third of all, one of my classmates went missing in the middle of the semester and never came back. I'd bet you $1 million that janitor knows exactly where that kid is. So let me tell you about what I saw, and then I'll tell you what Annette says she saw. There's a trophy case in the main hallway that has trophies covered in dust, won by students who are probably dead by now. And the janitor was mopping the hallway right by this trophy case from the year 1. I look at his face and he's ugly, I admit, but he's like normal ugly. Then I glance at his reflection in the like plexiglass or whatever it is on that wall display thing with the old trophies, and I swear I saw a full-on wolf face looking back at me. And I could see exactly what he looks like when he transforms and catches kids. That's what he told me and this kid, Jonathan, that he does. He said he catches kids and locks them up and saves them until he turns into a werewolf and feels hungry. Then he eats the kids, but not even right away, you know? Like he does it one piece at a time, just to be like more of a total dick about it, you know? At least that's what he told us he does. And that kid, Jonathan, started crying, which made both me and the janitor sort of laugh. I mean, he was all whimpery and everything. It was just funny. You had to be there. Anyway, Ned is the one who saw the most. I mean, she saw a lot more than I did. According to her, she saw the janitor that we've been talking about in the area behind the stage in the assembly hall, like on the right side in the back. She was cutting through there as a shortcut, and she said she got real quiet and spied on the janitor because he was making weird noises. She said that honestly, she thought he was making sexy noises, like he was, you know, doing something back there. But when she watched long enough, she noticed that he wasn't doing anything like that at all, either to someone else or to himself. He was just having some kind of an attack, and he was clearly in a lot of pain. Like he was collapsing to the floor and getting up over and over. And he was like grunting and groaning because he was having some kind of trouble. She thought about going over to ask him if he needed help, when he suddenly started howling like a wolf. And right in front of her eyes, his face extended outward into a long dog nose with black nose leather at the end. His teeth elongated into fangs fit for a monster, which is exactly what he was now becoming. According to Annette, even before he was finished changing form, he began sniffing and smelling around himself. The janitors seemed to be smelling her presence. Annette says he would always creep on her about how he liked her perfume. She says she doesn't use perfume, it must be the smell of her shampoo or something, but anyway, she figures the creep was smelling that she was there, and so she split out of there, back to where other people were, as fast as she could. Since that day, she says she avoids eye contact with the janitor. She doesn't want him to know that she saw what she saw. I looked in her eyes when she told me all that, and so I know she wasn't lying about any of it. She's genuinely scared of that janitor. Actually, I think we all are. Even if he weren't a werewolf, he is still a creep who stares at me too much. I mean, Sylvia says it's wrong for us to pick on people from a lower income bracket than ourselves. But I don't think being poor makes it okay to be like the way that guy is. And besides, like I said, the janitor in our school is a werewolf. I needed a word that rhymed with Mary, so I looked one up in the dictionary. The results I got were fragmentary. Just know the Mary A is a dignitary. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Mary Anderson, for making this episode possible. Mary donated to us using our handy-dandy thanks button located under each of our YouTube videos, and we can't thank her enough. Thanks, Mary. If you would like to walk among the truly great people of YouTube like Mary Anderson, then listen to what this next little fella has to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LASCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.